Hi, everyone. Welcome to our next virtual meetup in collaboration with Machine Learning in Healthcare Meetup Group and the Meetup.ai Meetup Group. And today we have a panel discussion on AI in healthcare. And please feel free to leave comments. We will look at them towards the end. And also at the end of the session, there will be a Wunderlink link that we will use to network. And let me introduce you Nicholas, who will be our host today. And he's also the organizer of the Meetup.ai Meetup Group. So welcome, Nicholas.
Thank you, Jofi. Hi, everybody. Great to be here. If you're joining us, this is our second collaboration with the Machine Learning Healthcare Group. We're very, very excited to be here about a topic that is very close to our community, which is AI in healthcare. And I'm risking here to say that this might be the best panel that we had yet to discuss this topic and to get to know a bit more about what to expect about AI in healthcare in 2021 as we start off the year. So joining me today for the discussion, we have a group of expert panelists. I would like to both welcome and introduce them to all of you. So, hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us, for actually lending us your very valuable time in discussing this topic of our communities. I am joined today by my colleague and often collaborator, Vince Madai, who is a senior AI researcher at the Charité, the CSO for AI for Medicine, and also the lead for Machine Learning Healthcare Berlin. Michelle Livney, who is a medical ML research engineer at Google Health. Renee Yao, who is the global healthcare lead for AI startups at NVIDIA. Gloria Macia, which is a senior data scientist at Roche, focused on market access, reimbursement, and regulatory. And finally, that's me. Finally, I am actually the last one to introduce myself. My name is Nicholas. I am an economist, and I will have the pleasure today to be hosting this discussion. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And let's just jump directly into the topic with, personally to each one of you, what is the area in AI in healthcare which you're most excited about, which you see some interesting things happening this year? Well, let's start. Who wants to take this question first? Let's go with Vince then. As the co-organizer, I give him the first right of answer.
Yeah, thank you, Nico. So maybe a disclaimer from my side first, and that disclaimer is that I actually think that AI in healthcare is a very, very interesting area, and that we do have lots of promises, and really it can really probably even revolutionize healthcare at a certain point. This disclaimer is necessary because you will hear many things from me today, which are very, very critical about the status quo. And I don't want you to believe that I'm actually against this technology. So to answer your question, which is the most promising area, or the most interesting area? And of course, that is when we talk about clinical decision support and outcome prediction, where we really can or might be able to leverage AI to really change outcomes, to really improve the well-being of patients, or even save patients' lives. In contrast to this, many of today's applications that made it into the clinic are very, very narrow. They are often diagnostic, and they're not very much related to really the outcome of the patient. So I think this is really the most interesting area with the highest impact. Yeah,
that's actually very good. And just before I lend the word to everybody, we're actually very, very lucky tonight to be joined by 3 speakers from great companies involved in healthcare. But I have to remind everybody that all opinions mentioned tonight are those of the speakers themselves. They're not here actually representing their companies. This is their private opinion about what they truly love and are passionate about in healthcare, and also some of the bottlenecks and issues that we might be facing. So who wants to follow up, Vince, with their favorite or more interesting, promising part in healthcare right now?
I can
Renee?
go next. Sure. So, of course, for me, working at NVIDIA, I do see a lot of companies that tend to, one, have intensive GPU intensive workloads and require large amount of computation power to be able to crank through the data to get insights. And on top of that, likely some of the more real-time use cases are the ones that I am more exposed to. So with that setting the stage, some of the stuff that I thought was really, really exciting right now for AI, one is federated learning, more on the research side, but late last year, NVIDIA, we announced a partnership with 20-some hospitals actually using Clara federated learning, which essentially you can build robust AI models without moving the data across facilities. And we managed to do that across various institution, geographies, and patient demographics, and also medical scanners. So I think that's an area that actually has seen a lot of traction and movement. The second area, including drug discovery. So many of us, and of course, from Roche, we can probably hear more from her as well, that it takes 10 years to develop a drug, right? But now with more computational power behind it, it's actually a lot easier to be able to discover the protein-ligand interaction or genomics analytics and all of those things that could potentially help us better find drug targets. That's also another very interesting area, fast and coming, especially with the pandemic putting drug discovery in the spotlight last year. Last but not least, smart hospital is a very interesting space as well. A lot of Alexa or smart cameras that we are used to in our smart homes, you can also see that in a smart hospital environment to help reduce physician burnout and increase operational efficiency and improve patient satisfaction. So those are the top three areas: federated learning, drug discovery, and smart hospitals that I am particularly very excited about regarding AI in healthcare.
That's actually very, very nice. Federated learning, I know, is a very good topic in Meetup AI. And one of the reasons for that is because next week we're actually covering federated learning as well. So it's just a perfect plug-in for us here in the community. Gloria, as we mentioned, drug discovery, why don't you follow up? What is exciting for you?
Wow, that was a very good introduction from Renee. I think what's super exciting for me also in that space is how regulators are now increasingly being open to accept real-world evidence in clinical trials when filing for a new drug application, right? And the fact that the agencies are looking for evidence that this can be as reliable as doing like a traditional clinical trial, right? So how data science is changing that space, I think it's something very interesting, and I guess we will be touching more upon that later. I also think it's something very interesting, the amount of like patent fillings that we have with medical devices and AI, and how that has also triggered regulators to either adapt the current regulatory pathways or provide guidelines so that people can get to the market access, right? So I think that's it's also something which I'm super excited about. So definitely I feel the years to come, we are going to see more and more of this change that now we are seeing on the regulatory side being part of the market.
Perfect. Vince, you might as well prepare yourself that I'm going to throw something your way just after we hear from Michelle. So Michelle, what about you? We're not listening to you. You're muted.
Muted. Sorry. Thanks for the great introduction. So I'm very biased as I'm working on medical imaging in general. It's where I'm specialized, so what I'm most familiar with. But on that perspective, there's a topic that Renee touched a bit upon, and that is regarding the federated learning. So one of the greatest challenges in healthcare is really the limitation of data, not only because of privacy issues, but also because of the amount of data we need to train well-performing models. And what I've noticed in the last year that we're having more and more developments to better leverage data that slowly starts to infiltrate also the healthcare modeling. And by this, I mean, when we look about big transfer models, as well as semi-supervised methods that basically we're coming now from computer vision, but are started to be applied in healthcare. And that's another way to tackle this problem together with federated learning, of leveraging big data also in that field. So yeah, this is of course, yeah. So it's relevant for many fields, but particularly for imaging. I think we're going to start to see some big applications.
I think that the panel that we have tonight is very startup friendly as well, given that both Michelle, Vince, me, and Renee have worked or are working right now with startups. I believe Gloria also in the past has founded and worked in startups as well. But I'm going to say something that Gloria said was a big point about real world data. This is something that normally startups push a lot for because it's something that tech companies feel very at ease doing and collecting and questioning compared to clinical trials, which is something that more healthcare related startups feel comfortable with. So I wanted to send this to Vince and say, like, do you have any positions regarding real world data and how it is possible? And already connecting a bit of this idea that a lot of startups feel that there's a regulatory wild west over there, that they don't feel that they are being listened to, that there's way too complicated to bring a product to the market today.
So maybe first the question about real world data. So I think that real world data is a very good idea to test ideas, and it's especially also a good idea to test for bias, because it's much easier to get data from different sources when it's real world data compared to running a randomized clinical trial at 10 centers to actually really represent the population for which the tool in which the tool is meant to be used. And this really is one of the reasons why real world data and then the results, real world evidence, are hyped for AI in healthcare. The challenge, though, is that just simply by definition, real world data is retrospective data and observational data, and that is a problem, because this cannot provide the same level of evidence as a randomized clinical trial. And while in that sense, while real world data can help to prototype, to be honest, it might even be enough at the moment, and this is where the Wild West starts. Even at the moment, to even get regulatory approval, it is not enough to get the level of clinical validation that is required to get into clinical guidelines. And this is, of course, a big obstacle. And I see that often also talking to people in startups. There is kind of this belief, once we are certified, everything is good. And that's, of course, not true, because, again, you need to get into the guidelines. You need to provide highest level clinical evidence so that actually doctors use it, and in many countries that you actually reimbursed by the public system. And this Wild West, to answer that quickly, is simply that regulatory bodies don't really understand AI in healthcare yet. So I think many would be shocked to simply hear what kind of tools have been certified. Some tools have been certified, AI in healthcare tools, with less than 100 patients. And I don't think I need to say more. Everybody can imagine that that tool is probably not unbiased, that that tool is probably not well certified. It also happened to me that there was a lead engineer of a solution who told me that he was shocked that the solution that they developed was actually certified. He would not have certified it.
I do love how tech people talk between themselves and how they actually go on the outside. That's a sentence that I never expected to hear, but I do believe that it was clearly said. I want to throw this then to Renee now, because you oversee around 1,000 startups that partner with NVIDIA. Do you feel that the regulatory constraints are very specific to healthcare? Do they make it, like, was one of the big challenges for startups in the sector? Do you see them struggling a lot, or are they learning? How do you feel about this?
Sure, thank you. Struggling overall, yes, but there are
Nice.
definitely some smart startups that ended up having figure out a way themselves, and the struggling specifically from the perspective that, especially, we see different stages of startups, right? The early stage one don't know how to approach that, and because of that, you started having companies like Enzyme that want to provide services for startups to help them take their solutions through regulatory approval. And though I have seen some great success, at least in the Inception ecosystem. And Inception is an NVIDIA virtual accelerator program for startups. And for some of the other startups who, quite frankly, decided that, you know what, if I'm going to wait 6 to 8 months for regulatory approval to come back, that's a lot of burn from the money perspective and shorten my runway. So they decided very upfront that they're going to go in with a solution that doesn't require regulatory approval. So that's also another area that we have seen huge changes. And some of the investors, quite frankly, said, I don't want to invest in anything that's going to require regulatory approval. Like in the medical imaging space, there are 300 some startups just within our program working in radiology. And for example, a company called Rad AI that does radiology impression using NLP solutions, they quite frankly don't need regulatory approval, and they are selling their solutions left and right, and the sales cycle is quite short, about 4 months time, instead of some of the other ones that require quite a long time to be able to get into the market. But of course, last year, COVID again put this whole thing in spotlight, and we have seen a lot of expedited approval in the market in healthcare. So Caption Health, for example, only just a few months, they got their expedited approval through FDA and able to move their really portable handheld ultrasound device into the market to help solve pandemic issues. So I think that gives you quite a variety of people really don't know what to do, and having people come in and support a gap to people just, you know what, I just don't want to touch this. And other ones that figured it out got expedited approval through FDA. So it's quite a wild world out there, and people are figuring out where they fit.
I think that I'm going to just throw this question to the whole panel. Are we worried here that there might be a bit of a race to the bottom, both in terms of startups trying to say that they are less regulated than they needed to be? I think me and Vince, we saw this quite a lot in the Berlin ecosystem, where everybody tells you like, no, of course we're a class 1 medical device. And we hear the companies like, pretty sure you're a class 2 medical device. Like, no, we're class 1. Like, they always trying their best to say what we're not, we don't need to be regulated, or we say that we don't need to be regulated. And sometimes there's like a bad surprise in the end when they realize actually, well, they need to be, or they won't pass the test for some of those things. So are we worried about it? And then as a follow-up question already, do you think that there will be a competition between countries to have, say, the easiest ecosystem to create AI in healthcare? Whoever wants to take it first. Otherwise, I'm going to choose somebody randomly.
Yeah, I can take that. I think
Gloria?
Adding to René's point about saying, some startups, they want to, they decide not to be a medical device at all, right? I think that's something that if we have people listening that they are startup founders or they plan to found a startup, I think that's a super important consideration, that the classification of your product is depending on your intended use, right? And the intended use will also base then the claims you can do on, let's say, your marketing brochures. So if you're building an app that incorporates, let's say, AI, and you say this app will help you be more chill and feel less stressed, that's definitely not a medical device. But if you say this app reduces anxiety, being anxiety a medical condition, then you are making it a medical device, right? So I would say there are definitely cases but then of course, when this app is in the market, then you cannot all of a sudden say it reduces anxiety, right? So I'm just saying there are cases where you can take this decision. And maybe those are these class 1 medical, not class 1 medical devices you were mentioning, but there are cases you can definitely not take this decision, right? If you're doing medical software that's diagnosing a life-threatening condition, I'm pretty sure you're going to be a class 3 medical device, and there is no way around it, right? And I think, and you should also accept that you cannot choose about that. But that's the thing. I think it's a conscious choice that has to be made at the beginning, and then decide whether you want to go forward or not. But classification of a medical device is, in most cases, not really a choice.
Yeah.
Very, very good point, Gloria. Vince, you want to follow up?
Just a little comment on this. I absolutely agree. It becomes interesting where you have, let's say, a bias tool, and you cannot fulfill a general claim for, let's say, the whole population. So we know that there are tools that already have been shown to, for example, have a lower efficacy in people of color, and not due to a real difference, but because just the tool is not tuned basically to also provide the same efficacy for people of color. And then sometimes I hear from the regulatory domain, oh, that's not a problem because you just need to declare your intended use. I just think that to declare the intended use that basically your tool will only work in white people is a, let's say, problematic declaration of intended use. So I think that will not really fly. And so there's also this problem that the moment you actually cannot really fulfill your claim for the whole population, then you run into serious problems.
That's a very good point. Gloria?
And I think if for the white population kind of point that Vince was making, I think it's then very important that if like medical professionals use this tool like HCPs, they should know that if they use it for another population that the one they have been tested on, they are essentially doing off-label use, right? So they would be the ones legally responsible for the damage that this tool could produce, right? And I'm not sure if that's sometimes communicated and if that awareness is there, right? So you could legally state like the population to which your medical device or your drug product is intended, but then that this communication reaches the end user, it's another question.
That's a very, very good point. And I do believe that a lot of those startups they don't have a lot of interest in making extremely clear that they are not as powerful as they would want it to be. Maybe they even believe that the tool would work fine in all populations, and it's just a matter of small percentage points. So that could be risky. And that brings a question which is very, very interesting and comes often in ethics and AI. Do we have a case of neutrality there, of neutrality of care? Or are we developing products which are meant for the populations which are more expressive or more economically relevant for us? Normally means white people, often means white males, which is even worse. So Vince, you were the instigator of that question at the beginning, so I'll send it back to you. But I would like to hear also from the panel, do you think that this is a problem in AI right now, that we risk developing tools for specific populations rather than for broad groups of people? Vince?
I basically answered that question already, right? Yes, it is definitely one of the biggest challenges that we face at the moment. And the good thing is that this is more and more recognized. I mean, there is also a whole area of machine learning fairness that is now really starting to grow. With tools to debias data, for example. But of course, bias is not only a problem of data. It can creep in any level in data annotation, even in data interpretation, even during the deployment process. So I think this is really one of the most pressing issues that we have currently, to really make sure that these tools benefit everyone in the end and not just a selected population. And just as a side note, this is a problem that we have been seeing in medicine since decades. And now that it has become basically now that we do individual predictions, many people are now very shocked. But in the end, on a population level, we have been discriminating on women, on people of color since decades, since 40, 50, 60 years, where we know that randomized clinical trials were not representative of minorities, of women, and so forth. So in the end, this is just a reflection of something that went very wrong in medicine and is still not solved.
That's actually a very, very good point, Vince. That a lot of problems in AI are actually just a reflection of other problems that we had before. And it comes through us to what we're developing very, very often. Does anybody else want to take a crack at that? Otherwise, I have a question for Michelle. Let's just do a quick look in the panel. So Michelle, you actually recently moved from the startup world to big tech. And a lot of the issues that we're talking about comes very often because startup companies are ill-prepared to deal with some of those regulatory issues or some of those, let's say, more institutional issues. Being somebody that made a transition, what do you think are some of the advantages of trying to crack those very complicated healthcare issues from inside of larger teams and larger companies?
I think you basically kind of just said that. I think one of the things that are really unique for when you develop healthcare products, in contrast to chat apps or games, is really the regulatory path, which is long and painful and expensive. And this is where big tech companies do have the advantage of having the resources to handle it. in a more systematic way, and really where in the end a lot of startups simply don't have the resources for that. So it's quite a big limitation, and I would say that one of the main advantages of the big tech companies there. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So I will keep on the pressure then, Michelle. So do you feel that there are any challenges right now that you feel we still need much more resources to even start dealing with them? That you said before in your introduction that there are matters of certain data limitations or the ability to connect with hospitals. Is there something right now that you really think that, okay, to crack something this size, it needs to be a huge company to do it?
Again, I think that the main resource I think about is really the long regulatory path. But of course, there are many challenges in the healthcare development. I think one of the things that if you think about bottlenecks in AI implementations, one of the major bottlenecks or challenges is the heterogeneity of data. So once you even get this amount of data, you need to handle that. And again, like probably with heterogeneity, not only you have a million different types of the data from different sources and the variability, but there are also high variability of the solutions for that problem. So I think this is another area with a lot of degrees of freedom, and there's a lot of ways to solve that always needs tackling.
That's actually very, very good. And that is a topic that connects basically all of us in a sense, which is the bottlenecks of actually AI implementation inside of healthcare. As Vince said in the very beginning of his introduction, it is an industry with a lot of potential, with a lot of hype, but often we do feel that there's just not enough actually coming into the healthcare setting. And this is because of a bunch of different bottlenecks. We already mentioned regulatory. So other than regulatory, I'd like to ask the panelists which kind of bottlenecks you think are really constraining the implementation of AI in healthcare today. And we're going to follow that up with questions on how we could maybe make some improvements on some of them. So I will start with Renee.
Sure, happy to. I think we talked at length about data and regulatory, so I focus on some of the other ones, but I do see a lot of challenges the startups face in particularly. For example, interoperability, infrastructure, also just figure out who's going to pay them, how does the reimbursement really work. And I think just to add some additional details for this panel and the audience here, I would just hone in specifically on the infrastructure side, given that I come from the GPU world. For startups to figure out what sort of infrastructure backend they need to support their solutions, different algorithms, or having multiple different algorithms to support multiple different use cases to start and putting something together that it can roll into a hospital for a POC, that's already a challenge on its own, right? Like, for example, do you have a Jetson Nano that's like this size, and you can maybe potentially run one body pose estimation to be able to detect patient fall at one use case at the patient bedside or at the elderly care center. But if you were to deploy that at scale, is it better to have like thousands of little Jetson NX at the bedside in each of the hospital room, or is it better to have a server in the data center and have maybe 4 T4s or 4 A100 that are a lot more enterprise grade and that have passed healthcare IT and be able to run multiple of these models together to be able to manage 10 of the hospital rooms together? Or do you actually use cloud, either GCP with Google or with Azure or with AWS? Or do you consider maybe doing a hybrid approach of be able to do something at the edge and run the main thing in the main data center? And if you do need additional compute, and burst it into the cloud sometimes. I think this is a question that a lot of the startups, quite frankly, especially the ones don't have very strong hardware system background, they struggle that a lot because the thing is not just it takes a lot of experience and a lot of money, but also they don't have a full picture of what the hospitals will actually allow them to do. They might be spending a lot of their cycles building the product just to prove themselves. And quite frankly, you cannot get through the hospital network, and they won't even let you show anything that you actually put together. So I think that from the infrastructure itself, it's a huge challenge also to be able to see vast AI adoption in the healthcare system. And I hope in the near future, many brilliant minds coming together will make that a lot easier for the innovators in this space.
That is actually super nice. Maybe the lack of some clear guidelines and best practices on dealing with certain hospitals does make it extremely complicated for companies that are outside of that circle, right? Gloria, I'm gonna send it to you, and I know actually that the reimbursement part is very dear to you. So unless you want to talk about something else, but what is a big bottleneck in your view?
No, I mean, actually, Nico, I wanted to reply about the reimbursement to Renee. Not a
All
bottleneck,
right,
but
perfect.
an opportunity. Because I
Okay.
think as we might have quite a few people listening from Germany, that might interest them, right? So Germany is actually the first country that has created a policy for the reimbursement of digital apps, having them AI or not, right? And that's called the DIGA, from Digital Health Assessment, right? And I think that's very exciting because otherwise, I mean, when you think about it, who pays? I mean, who pays for a medical app or for an app that has some healthcare benefits? And that's the patient itself, right? And that's not usually the way it works with like pharmaceutical drugs. That's not usually the way it works for medical device where you have your health insurance paying for it and indirectly the government, right? So
Mhm.
for that transition to happen in digital apps, I think it's a massive change, and many of you maybe happen to be in the first country that approved that, right? And that's something pretty new. I mean, at the moment, there have been only, like I checked today, submitted like 54 applications, and 10 apps have been granted this status, right? So I think that
Mhm.
definitely, if you qualify, I would certainly go for it.
It's actually super nice. Gloria is meaning the famously Diga that we say in Germany is actually a super interesting concept, and it's still slowly being implemented in Germany. And a lot of people are looking forward to what that will mean for digital health. If you are interested in this topic, I really recommend checking. There's a lot of good work on Diga out there. And but I'm gonna pressure you back a bit. A lot of startups are not used to having a system which the end user is not necessarily the payer. The person that actually recommends the system is not necessarily the one that knows the price of that system. So healthcare is famously complex. And I might even throw it here for somebody that likes market access. It's often very national. For companies that are hoping to blitz scale or to be able to hit multiple markets at once, even in Europe, it is still a big thing. So it's completely up to you. But do you see reimbursement then still as something that can kind of power companies through because it's a way to get paid back without necessarily the end user paying, or do you feel that this confusion might be a bottleneck?
Look, what I think it happens is mostly, and for me that shouldn't be an option, like startups figure out, like they figure out market access and they figure out reimbursement or the whole health technology assessment process on the road, right? And that's really
Yeah.
not the way to go. I would say as soon as you have a solid idea of a medical device, get yourself someone who can advise that, right? And if you are part of a startup hub, which is specialized with health startups, and that's very important, right? Because like in most cases, the kind of advice they will offer goes around intellectual protection, like IP. And I think that's something very important. But for healthcare startups, you have market access and health technology assessment or reimbursement, which are also super important pillars, right? So it's kind of like if you have a solid idea, get advice on that and make sure then your idea is viable. Like, will you find investors that knowing that your device or your drug will take 10 years to like get to the market, that they will invest on you, or they will see that as like a too high opportunity cost of their money and then they want to invest someone else, right? Kind of like my message is, I feel many startups fail, not because it's impossible from the regulatory side of view, but they fail to plan it. They fail the milestones because they never checked, in the FDA, like in the US, you will have the FDA to which you will apply, right? And in Europe, you have the notified bodies. Now we have the MDR, the new medical device regulation. So many of the companies that already had medical device in the market, either with AI or not, they have to recertificate, right? So do these notified bodies have enough capacity to take you on? because without their assessment, you will not get the certified stamp that gets you to the market, right? So kind of like my message is, don't figure it out on the way, plan it from the beginning and get someone who can help you on that.
Great. So Vince, I'm going to send it to you as the last one to comment on this, and then I'm going to start taking some questions from the audience. As a quick reminder, please just leave your questions on the comments. I am looking at them as they go. There's already quite a lot of good ones. So very, very happy to see you all engaged. But Vince, first, what is the bottleneck that gets on your nerves?
I can basically just echo what Gloria just said. I think many startup founders are very naive, and they are basically too much in love with the idea, what they find interesting, and often with the tech. Now, I completely understand that, because that's the reason they thought they really want to do this. Especially in the healthcare setting, I rarely encounter people who are in because they want to do it for the money. So that's not what I feel. I usually feel these are people that are really interested in that, what they do. And this is usually the problem. When I'm approached also mentoring, it's like, I have this super interesting idea, we're doing this and that. And I'm then really the party pooper, and I'm like, okay, wait a minute. So my first question is, so what's the use case and who's going to pay for it? Like, what do you mean? It's like, that's the answer. Like, but I just told you about this super interesting idea. And of course, as a researcher, I find it interesting, but you have just approached me as a potential founder and you want to have a company. So I can echo that exactly. So you need, from the beginning, you need a validation, clinical validation strategy, a data strategy, a regulatory strategy. Everything needs to be planned from the beginning. You need to get people on board who know that, which is a challenge, because you have to exactly fine-tune how much of this advice you actually need at which stage. It doesn't make any sense to be in a prototyping stage and pay a regulatory consultant who takes €1,000 for an hour to understand specifics, to fill in certain forms. So you need some much more general advice at the beginning, and you need to increase this while your company matures. And this is really the challenge, to find the right level of advice at the right stages of your development process.
I think that's actually very, very good advice, Vince, and it's just a good reminder, together with what Gloria just said, to not stick your head in the sand, right? I think we get passionate about something, we want to see it done, but mistakes done at the very beginning can often cost quite a lot later on. So let's look at the questions from the audience. Actually, this one is probably for Renee, but also Gloria. Viraj is asking if you know any tools that help certify products in AI and healthcare. I don't know which country he's coming from, but I think Renee mentioned Enzyme, right? Perfect. So to you too, Renee first.
Enzyme is a company. You can consider them more as a professional services company that actually you can just go and consult them and say that this is my product and this is where I think I need, and they can share that with you. And they have helped out a lot of our Inception partners to get regulatory approval. And I know specifically 2 products that I work very closely with that got FDA approval. So feel free to check out their webpage, and that's one of the companies that I would recommend.
Nice. What about you, Gloria?
I mean, I would say kind of think first in which market you're trying to get access, right? Is that the US with the FDA, or is like that Europe with the different notified bodies, right? And I think that's a very important choice. And based on that, I think I don't know about any for the US, so I guess I will go with Renee's suggestion. But I think in Europe, for instance, the Jona Institute, which is like a German-based company, they are extremely solid and great professionals, right? And they offer like a kit of templates of all the documents you will probably need to submit, right? So I would definitely recommend.
I would throw my hat in the ring as well and say that the work from the guys at Flying Health here in Berlin is very, very good if you're looking at the German market. But maybe as an extra tip, Viraj, if you're coming from the very, very early stage, a lot of those groups actually run online events. They put a lot of materials for free. So just researching and contacting them, even if you're not at the point right now of actually hiring somebody, there's still quite a lot that can be acquired by different associations and explanations. And there's an avid community of people asking the same question that you're asking. So it's always good to connect and to share tips. And then I'm going to follow up with a question from James Kerr, which I actually quite like. So thank you very much, James, for this question. exciting applications in diagnostics and decision support get a lot of attention. But do you think there's some low-hanging fruit where AI applications might exist but haven't reached users yet? That's actually a pretty nice question. Let's think here about low-hanging fruit, things that we could see more, but is still not there, maybe because it's a bit too boring. Renee?
Sure, I can take a stab at that. I think some of the low-hanging fruits, one that most people come in and just said, okay, that should be automated already. It's probably related to administration part of it, a lot of repetitive work, and doesn't require a lot of skill set to be able to perform at scale and at the quality that's needed. I think there's a lot of potential to be able to do something there with NLP solutions, with conversational AI solutions, and things like that. We have started seeing some traction in the space. For sure, with some of the company, for example, Cure AI, CURAI, .ai. I think that's one of the companies that does that. And then a lot of other companies that are not specifically in healthcare, but also did really well, like OTTER, Otter.ai, a couple of other companies that start coming in really to use voice to be able to help streamline a lot of the processes. And even within NVIDIA, right, we create a lot of the application frameworks for developers to take to be able to build solutions like that. And the framework, we call them Jarvis, JARVIS, that you can actually take and be able to build solutions like that. So solutions like these that I think a lot of the tech companies, not just NVIDIA, like Microsoft, Google, all put together these frameworks out there to enable a large group of developers to be able to build tools. It's challenging because actually these models right now do require some pretty heavy compute to be able to do it in the real-time format and be able to provide the latency that user will consider as, very normal, instead of just know that, okay, I'm talking to a bot and I don't want to talk to the bot anymore. And the other challenge is, of course, from the data perspective, a lot of data needs to, one is to be collected, right? And know that what data you're collecting to be able to solve the problem that you need. And also after you collect the data, you also need to parse through the data to know that like, I figure out of the 800,000 calls, mainly there are 4 use cases. They ask to change their appointment. They ask when they can get their prescription and when they can meet their doctor. It's very simple questions like that could potentially be automated and speed up. And of course to augment our administrators' effort in this field. So that I think is one area that's considered as probably low-hanging fruit.
Very good. Vince?
I'd just like to comment on this. I completely agree. And now you might ask yourself, well, how do I find this easy question? Because that is kind of the challenge, right? And there's a simple advice. You have to talk to the doctors. You have to understand the use case. By the way, not only doctors. We often forget that healthcare is not only about doctors. There are probably great use cases also in nursing, in physiotherapy, in many other areas. So let's talk about medical professionals, not just doctors. But I just want to give a quick example. So I think it was like 3 years ago when I was talking to some people who were developing a solution to identify diagnoses in chest in X-rays, and they really tried to have more and more diagnoses. And I was like, if you actually know radiologists, they love to find real diagnoses. What they hate is the 95% or how many or even higher amount of images that don't show anything, that are normal. And they still have to write the report. They still have to look at it. So actually, if you want to have something that they would love to use, is that something that flags this is normal, and they can do what is fun for them, right? And I think it was like half a year ago that I talked to another company like this who told me, yes, we are actually looking now into like finding normal X-rays. And I'm like, yeah, I heard that before. But what's the problem? The problem is that many of the people who they think they found something that is a clinical problem, but actually it's not the real problem. It's not the low-hanging fruit that the users, that the healthcare system actually needs. So there must be more doctors need to be in the startups, more medical professionals, need to be in the startups, and vice versa. The tech people need to understand medicine better. To really find these low-hanging fruits.
Very, very good. Any other chime in from the panel? Because otherwise I would like to also add my 2 cents. All right. So a topic that is actually close to me is the idea of how much money actually we spend in hospitals. So if you look at the data from the US, the expenditure on hospital, literally, it's similar to what is already being spent in pharmaceuticals. And when we talk about it, everybody figure out that, oh, it's getting too expensive to treat people. But it's also that how inefficient we are treating people. I know even that Renee is nodding along because it's a topic that she also likes. So this is extremely boring work. This means figuring out ways to increase efficiency of care, checking out if people fell from their beds, checking out if they solid themselves or anything else. This is work that only comes, as Vince said, from having a very deep understanding of actually what gets on the nerves of doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals, what actually costs them money and why it costs so much money. And if you think that with healthcare costs intended to increase for the foreseeable future, with an aging population and everything else, we have to be in an active hunt for such efficiency gains. It is a matter as important, maybe, as figuring out new treatments. Is how to just be better at all the treatments that we do already. So that is my boring solutions that I think we could have it in the market. But I hope that from the thousands of startups that Renee is looking, at least some of them are working boring but very, very crucial topics.
Absolutely, absolutely. Happy to share more after this, just in case there's some other questions.
Awesome.
To get to.
Then we have a question from Jade, and I'm going to guess here that this question is from Michelle, but if I'm wrong, the panel, please correct me. Can you comment on how to tackle low sample size as a limiting factor for reliability, especially with the point that it has just been raised about data being representative of the general population? Thank you very much, Jade, for the extremely nerdy question. That's our bread and butter, and that's why we're here.
That is a very good question, because this is one of the most common things you see in medical data. You have very small data sets, and then you have a very skewed distribution due to the pathology. So in stroke, for example, you have a very skewed population according to age. In other diseases, you may have due to other epidemiological reasons, but also due to the way the data was gathered and other biases. So there are many answers to that. Generally, from the engineering perspective, the best solution is to get more data. Just invest in that. This is, of course, the easiest to say. If it's not possible, then of course, again, there are other ways. So starting with really trying to use methods of transfer learning and semi-supervised learning when you don't need to have full labeling of the data, which is one of the most expensive resources to have medical professionals labeling. So leveraging unlabeled data or data from other, so for example, without pathology, this can be used in the model development. So I can point to, for example, a big transfer that was published in the last year, and also noisy student approach are specific methods that can be used for semi-supervised learning and soft labeling. And what I think is important to keep in mind, Vince mentioned before a bit, and you too, Nico, we talked a bit about bias in data, and the new rising of awareness to that. So it's not new, it was always there, but now there is some more awareness of that, which I find highly important. I think it's important, especially for us as engineers and developers that bring these new solutions to the world, not just care about the model performance, because this is what we obviously want to have. This is what we're selling as startup companies or as big companies for our products. But I think the next step is really to make responsible machine learning, and that means assess the biases and the fairness metrics, and that basically entails other performance metrics that are then kind of represent better the rest of the population, and may inquire this kind of data leveraging not just because you have a small amount of data, but also deal with the fact that it's so skewed due to all the different reasons.
Exactly. That's a great answer, Michelle. Thank you very much. It always amazes me how, when talking about AI in healthcare, we very often come to the same topics that we discuss in ethics in AI, and now doing a plug-in for ourselves. So I really recommend people that like this topic to look at our previous collaboration on AI and ethics, ethics and AI, sorry, where we do speak a lot about this, and we also speak about the higher standard that we put healthcare AI in, because we believe it is intelligent, that we believe that okay, it's something that shouldn't err in the same way that humans do. So it's a great topic. Really recommend, take a look. The next question is from Ian Paul. It's in a similar point, and then we're going to follow this up with a question for the panel. So I want you all to be prepared, because we're going to talk about something that we haven't talked so far, and it happens way too often. We didn't talk about the patient, and we didn't talk about the user. So our next question is going to be about that. But first, Ian is asking us, what do you think is the role of interpretable machine learning and explainable AI in healthcare applications in the near future? What is being done to support that goal? He asked by big tech, I see in the end, but Vince knows my position about this. I think it's a role for everybody. So how do you see it in a field like healthcare, where people feel very connected on why you're telling me to do this? Why do you think this will help me out? How do you see the role of explainable AI? Whoever wants to take it first. Otherwise, I'm gonna throw it to Vince or Michelle. Michelle, back.
I will not answer the full question, but there was specifically a question about how the big tech relates to that. I can say that Google has an insane investment in that, and we're talking about both in Google Cloud for clients. And both internally, it's something that is highly invested in big tech. The interesting thing is that sometimes you see that clients are not always interested or are not sure what to do with that. So, like, the technology is there. Google is definitely doing, like in the name of Google, we say definitely doing that. But yeah, it depends also in the end of what the clients want and how they want to use it. So with that, I'll pass to Vince.
Very good. I see also that Gloria unmuted yourself. Gloria, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I want to add, I think one of the things that is being done is don't expect to pass an audit to sell your device on the market without having a paragraph about that on your medical device file, right? So that's one of the questions you will be asked, and by the auditor or by the FDA in the US case, and you will be expected to be able to provide an explanation of how that medical device is meeting those decisions, right? So I think that's, for me, a clear measure. And I think, to me, the explainability point is all the conversation with regulators or with HCPs or with patients. It's all about building trust, right? And that's where all this explainability comes in. So how come you expect to put something on the market that you don't truly understand, and then others to trust their lives on it, right? For me, it's just not a question.
That's actually very good. Vince?
Yes, to add on this, it will be an on one hand and on the other hand answer. So on one hand, I completely agree. There is absolutely, from many perspectives, probably explainability as a concept is really a no-brainer. So we also published recently a paper about this, looking at this from a multidisciplinary perspective, where we really showed that patients, doctors, from a legal perspective, it will be required, even also an ethical analysis, probably even unethical, to not have explainability. So what is the on the other hand? The on the other hand is now becomes quite interesting, and that is, do actually current XAI methods fulfill this requirement? Do they really provide explanations? We can look at this from a technical point of view, where actually many of these XAI explainability, these are just models themselves. These are basically models that try to get an idea what happens. So it's basically a local approximation of this global model. It's kind of a slice through the model, and you can just show this also mathematically, that it can also really mean that you can have different local explanations at a certain point, so you get different explanations for the same thing. So you have technical problems here. Secondly, if you look at it from a philosophical point of view, much of what is provided today is not, you would never call them explanations. Actually, they do not explain you anything. So I'm worried that what we call today explanations is misleading, that XAI cannot fulfill it. And now you have companies, startups, that are supposed to provide explanations because the regulatory bodies are picking up on this, and they kind of require something that might not even fulfill what they actually think that it will fulfill. It's quite frankly a big mess at the moment, this whole explainability field. So yes, it's probably required in the great concept, but in practice, we're absolutely not there yet. And just as a last point, we tried different explainability methods in our lab on two imaging models that we developed in our lab. And we can't even publish this. It's a complete mess. It's really, we don't know what's going on there. And now I imagine that I'd be a startup that is required to provide this, to write a paragraph about it, as Gloria said, because the regulatory body wants it, and I don't even know what's going on. And this probably will not elicit a lot of trust. So there's a lot of work that we still need to do in this field.
I completely agree. And I see that Ian made a very, very good point. Clients will care once regulatory bodies require interpretability. So as this becomes more and more of a requirement, maybe the clients will start also paying more and more attention. It's a bit of a chicken and an egg kind of problem. So we'll come with a...
Nick, I would just throw a couple
Renee,
of
yes.
in there, not to repeat anything that the panelists have already said, but take a look at Darwin AI, H2O.ai, Data Robot, and some of the work that also NVIDIA has worked on with explainability, and some of the work we have done also with Rapids AI as well. So those are a couple things to, I think, will be good reading material for the folks who are very interested in this area.
I think actually that's a great idea, and I super recommend people taking a look on whatever topic you liked in this panel. Take the opportunity to check out the work of the panelists and dive a bit deeper. All those topics could have panels on themselves, basically, and we're lucky to be exploring many of them. So one of the last questions that we're actually going to go into the panel is a group that is very often forgotten in this discussion, but we also speak a lot about being patient-centric. But for example, we didn't mention much about patients in this whole discussion. So I'm going to be a bit mean, and I'm going to ask the panelists, what is the role of the patient actually in this whole discussion about AI and healthcare, and should we care? So whoever wants to take it first. Otherwise, I would say I'll start with Gloria.
I mean, I can take it. I think we had a question before that was about like we don't have enough data. What can we do? And to me that relates to the patient, right? I think a key point is engaging with the patient communities, because they can be your stakeholders, and that's something that's very often forgotten, right? For instance, now in like a few days you have the Rare Disease Day coming, right? So it's a great opportunity to find unmet clinical needs, and also patient communities that are very eager to have those solutions, right? So I think that's giving it a twist to the situation. Then also another point, Patient Connect is as policy groups, and they are extremely powerful. I mean, we all have seen on the media the testimonial of a patient and how impactful that can be, right? And I mean, the major regulatory reform we are having in Europe is because of a breast implant scandal, right? And that was mostly triggered by those group of women. So like never underestimate the patient. And to the data point, I would say like, ask yourself, is you don't have enough data because you don't have the means to do clinical studies or clinical trials, or you don't have enough data just because there is no more data, because maybe it's like an orphan disease. And then you can make the case from a regulatory point of view, right? So kind of like analyze the game and find where you are on the board.
Very, very good point, Gloria. Who wants to go next? What about Michelle? Michelle was slightly surprised that I picked her out of the lineup. I'm sorry.
I'm an engineer. I don't deal with patients.
Maybe that is a point to make then.
No, I think in the end, this is what we all need to keep in mind. I think we all work in the healthcare industry, and I think this is something we can do in our everyday and really aspire to make people's life better. I know that's one of the things that motivates me, and I'm sure each one of the people here in the panel. So of course, this is what we're thinking about and what we aspire for, like as the most basic goal of everything. I come back to think about again. I think about the user, and it's also one of the questions related to interdisciplinary and the role of that. And it always makes me think. In Anna Karenina, there is a sentence at the beginning that says that all happy families are happy in one way, and all sad families are sad in their own ways. And it's kind of, I think, when you develop a product, whether as a startup or as in big tech, machine learning, healthcare, there are so many ways to make that wrong. So many ways, like your use case, your algorithm, your user, your data, so many things. But there's really just one way to make that right. This is via these interdisciplinary groups that Viz will also mention before, tapping in the regulatory people, the user research, all of this in the right time, in the right dose. And this is also, I think, where the patient comes again in, both in sense of motivation and sense of how it relates to your product in each part of the phases.
Very, very good. So Vince, do you want to follow up with that?
I think every good meetup ends with a quote from Russian literature.
I do believe so. I think it's in our contracts, right? When we sign up with Meetup, they force us to take Russian literature 101. That's actually a pretty good one. But actually, I want to close with a different question. So unless you have something, and then of course Renee as well, about the user, I like to close the meetup on a question about startups. So Vince, first you.
Sorry, what do you mean? I didn't get that.
Your point about users. So what's the role of the user in this discussion? Make it short and sweet.
That is actually a very, very good point. You can have the best model, you can have the best use case, you can get the best regulatory, pathway, clinically validated. If your UX UI is really, really bad, the users will be so frustrated that they will not use it, they will not use it right, and you will still fail. And this is a very, very underrated topic, usability. So I think that is what comes to my mind when you ask me about users.
Of course. And that's actually a very, very good point. Renee?
Yeah, I think there's a saying of customers are always right in the restaurant environment, right? And I think in this case, patients, you could consider them as a form of customers, and patients should always demand more and better user experience, product experience. And the smarter entrepreneurs definitely should have patients as one of the user story, essentially, to understand the user's pain points and before making a product. And just one situation that I recently heard about, of course, if women have breast cancer, right, like undergo certain procedure is actually extremely painful. Anyone that go through colonoscopy, that's also extremely painful. And so as soon as when you hear there's something painful or slow, or just people are getting impatient and angry, that's where a great entrepreneur innovators can come in and fix. Like, for example, earlier when I talked about the breast cancer, another startup, Isono Health, ISONO Health, they're doing the first portable and automated 3D breast ultrasound scanner. So this little device is like, if you imagine it being kind of like round, and then you can actually put it in a bra. And no one have really thought about that. And they're the first startup that's thinking about using multiple different solutions to be able to solve a patient's pain point in a very, very unique, transformative way. So I would say patience king, and figure out how to solve a king's problem will go a long way.
That's actually a very, very, very good point, Renee. And just like Vince said, I imagine that a lot of startups forget about this until it's a bit too late. At the same time, the other companies make this the main point of their existence, right? To actually listen to the patient when they feel that he hasn't actually been heard before. I won't have time today to actually approach Damon's question, but Damon, if you're interested in this topic, I would recommend taking a look at hanai.eu, HANAI, from Shamala Henderson. It is also about maternal mortality, so it's a very good topic. And to actually close off the panel, because once again, we are very startup friendly here, and we know that from our communities, a lot of people listening to us will be coming from this space. So the question, and you can also take this as a kind of final statement from each one of the speakers, what do you think is the role of startups in this? We spoke about how complicated it is, how full of bottlenecks. So, and follow up with what would be some advice that you would give? I know there's a lot of advice has already been given, but if you want to make a final point of it and something for the users and for the viewers to remind themselves, now is the time. So I will start with Gloria. First, you.
Okay, I think for me, the role of startups is you guys bring innovation. Big companies are there to run the processes, right? To make accessibility of that innovation. But rarely you will. It's very difficult for a big company to be as innovative as a startup can be because it's simply not agile. It has too much inertia. It has too much momentum. So that's what I see startups bringing the game. And then advice, I would say like three things that we have mentioned, right? If you're to play in that game, get a clinical expert on board, right? And that can be a doctor. You don't need to hire a doctor. You can have him as a part of your advisory board, right? Then get a regulatory expert on board, someone who can advise you on market access and reimbursement from the very beginning. And again, you don't need to hire a consultant. You can get something sitting on your board, maybe someone who will do it in exchange of like scientific publications. You never know really what are the motivations of people, and they can have other interests than money, right? And then engage with your patient communities, because even when your device is on the market, you won't have, most likely as a startup, the field force to follow up on the doctor so that they use your product, so that they take on that risk, right? So the doctor you had on your clinical, as in your board, can be a community leader in that sense, and then patient organizations who can push from the bottom, right? So you will have this bottom-up push, which is super good. Yeah.
Gloria, that was some great advice. Jesus, if I had a startup right now, like I wish I had talked to you before. So who's gonna follow up with this one? Vince?
I can't add anything else. I think this was a perfect statement.
Perfect.
The startups should think and do and, how they should basically approach it. Nothing to add.
Vince, as a serial entrepreneur, probably is realizing like maybe I should have done some of those things at some points in my life. So I'll send it over to Renee with all the startups that she oversees.
What was the first question again? I know the second one was advice.
So no, actually, the first one is what the role of startups is
right.
in this ecosystem.
Yeah, for me, startups are definitely the disruptor in the space. And when many years ago, when MGH first put together the bone density solution, it took them 2 years. And a startup coming in San Francisco could take the concept to idea in 3 to 4 months. So I think disruptors are coming, and they're coming in large quantity in army format. So I would say large companies, if you're sitting there thinking that no one's going to come eat your lunch, I would definitely think twice. So disruptors are definitely coming. You can look at Artisight in Smart Hospital. Hyperfine just closed $90 million, oversubscribed Series D yesterday, portable MRI. Atomwise last year, $123 million in drug discovery space. Many digital pathology startups. I met with 40 earlier this year, and that's a very difficult space, but man, the innovation is very, very exciting. And one thing that I would like to share with the startups, if you're a startup in the space, is one of my, I really admire Ali Miller, who works at AWS Work, and she posts constantly on LinkedIn and great advice for startups. I'm just going to repeat what she says here. And she said that this is the process of production in AI. Prove that it is possible, prove that it can be improved, then make it better, make it good enough, make it awesome, and make it cheaper, and then make it way cheaper, and make it easier to make more of it, and then make it easier that none of the machine learning engineers will have to do it. So common, like normal people can actually do it. So startups, that will be your challenge. And to go down that list, first find a problem, and then make sure that everyone will be able to use it, and patients can use it with no problems in the future.
That is, again, great advice. And I recommend everybody to take a look at the many links which are in the comments to do a bit of a deep dive on some of those things and to double check some of the companies that Renee mentioned, because I would do it. I'm super excited about many that you just mentioned. And then that leaves Michelle as the last one to give her 2 cents. Michelle, what about you?
I can only second what everybody said about the power of innovation and agile workflow. So I think this is an amazing contribution of startups that only startups can do in this way. Regarding a tip or advice, I think there is really you need to be so careful about your recipe, about how you do it, because again, there are so many ways to fail and pretty much only one way to make it right. I want to recommend actually a paper I think Vince published this year, where actually he wrote the guidelines for this, so I can recommend this reading for startups.
I would take that plug in as well and say that we have a discussion with Vince and his co-author in the YouTube from Meetup AI, and I really recommend you watching it. It's a good talk. Thank you, Michelle. That's actually a very, very nice way. Also to remind startups that despite all the energy and passion that there is in the beginning, there's, as we mentioned many times in this, healthcare is a lot about planning and is a lot about making sure that you understand the risks that you're going into. Even if you don't know how to answer all the questions, at least know which questions are there. Don't go blind into this. Take a look at which kind of resource you can get, or for free, or by bringing them into your startup as an advisor. I would like personally to thank all 4 panelists today for bringing their insights from different parts of the ecosystem. I personally had a lot of fun from the comments from the audience. I also think that they had a lot of fun. This video will stay up, so you can check out, if you came in late, you can check up the beginning later. Now we will be joining some of you in the networking session using the Wonder link. So thank you all for joining us and to watching so far. Thank you, panelists, for this. And I'm hoping that we'll see each other soon. For everybody else, a good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Thank you. The Wonder link is in the comments. And we'll see you in that space. Thank you. Bye-bye.